David handed me a beautiful silver pen that morning, kissing my forehead and saying it was for luck during my big presentation. "You're going to need all the confidence you can get today," he whispered with what I thought was encouragement. 10 minutes into presenting to our biggest potential client, my thumb flicked an unseen switch and I heard a faint hum. This gift was a trap. My slides were bulletproof, my preparation flawless, but David wasn't documenting my success. I realized he wasn't just spying on me. He was gathering proof to hand over to our investors, evidence of whatever failure he expected to witness. My own husband had turned my moment of triumph into his weapon of destruction. The weight felt wrong the moment I gripped it. For something that looked elegant and sleek, this pen felt oddly heavy in my palm. I was 3 minutes into presenting our quarterly growth strategy to Hartwell Industries when the realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just a pen. I kept talking about market penetration statistics while my fingers explored the barrel. The executives on my laptop screen nodded along as I explained our methodology, completely unaware that my world was crumbling. My thumb found a barely visible switch near the clip, and I could hear the faintest electronic hum. A recording device, built right into what David had presented as a thoughtful gift. Every loving gesture this morning had been a performance. The betrayal cut deeper than any affair could have. This was calculated, planned, rehearsed. David had looked me in the eyes while handing me the instrument of my own destruction. I clicked through my presentation slides while fighting to stay clear-headed, my brain processing the implications. David was documenting this meeting for a reason. He expected something to go wrong. But why would he think I'd fail? I had spent 3 months preparing for this presentation. I knew these numbers better than my own birthday. The Hartwell Industries CEO was asking about our retention rates. I answered smoothly while my mind raced through recent conversations. His casual questions about my preparation, his offers to help with the slides that I had politely declined, his insistence that we record the presentation for our own review later. Then it clicked. Last week's investor call where Marcus Chen had pressed David about my competence. "We need proof she can handle the big accounts," Marcus had said. David had promised documentation. The recording light was active, a tiny red dot barely visible unless you knew what to look for. David was capturing every word, building a case against me for investors who already doubted my abilities. He had positioned his laptop at the perfect angle to capture not just the screen, but my facial expressions. He was sitting just outside the camera frame, watching my every move. My paranoia was justified now, but I couldn't let it show. The Hartwell executives were impressed with my responses. They were engaged and asking detailed follow-up questions. David shifted in his seat, just outside my peripheral vision. I could feel his energy change as the presentation continued successfully. This wasn't going according to his plan. The realization hit me like electricity. I could turn this around. David had given me a gift after all, just not the one he intended. If he was recording my performance, I could make sure he captured something worth keeping. I could document my competence, my expertise, my value to our company. I could create evidence of my own worth instead of my supposed incompetence. But first, I needed to understand the full scope of his plan. The recording device meant he expected an audience for my failure. The pen suggested this was bigger than just marital problems. This was about our business, our shared company, our professional future. 8 years of marriage had taught me to read David's moods. He was tense today in a way that had nothing to do with normal presentation nerves. He had been checking his phone constantly this morning. He had taken 2 mysterious calls that he claimed were client emergencies. He had been unusually affectionate and supportive, which in hindsight felt like overcompensation. I wrapped up my opening remarks while making a decision. David wanted to record this presentation. Fine. I would give him a performance worth recording. I would document my expertise so thoroughly that his plan would backfire completely. The pen in my hand would become evidence of my competence, not my failure. His weapon would become my shield. The Hartwell Industries team was ready for the detailed budget breakdown. I smiled at my laptop camera and clicked to the next slide. David had no idea that his carefully planned trap was about to become the foundation of his own destruction. His recording device would capture every moment of what came next. I kept the pen clicking steadily in my hand, making sure the device caught every word of what would be the most important presentation of my career. But as I spoke about quarterly projections and market analysis, a darker thought crept in. If David was willing to sabotage me this publicly, what else had he been planning behind my back? How long had he been working against everything we had supposedly built together? Richardson and Associates had consumed nearly a decade of my life. The consulting firm that bore both our names represented every sacrifice I had made since David and I graduated from business school. We had started with nothing but ambition and a shared vision in our tiny Portland apartment, where our kitchen table doubled as our conference room and our bedroom closet housed our filing system. Those early days felt like a lifetime ago now. David and I had worked 18-hour shifts, surviving on takeout Chinese food and the kind of desperate energy that comes from knowing failure meant losing everything. I spent my nights crafting detailed market analysis reports, while David practiced his presentation skills in front of our bathroom mirror. We complemented each other perfectly, or so I believed. I was the analytical backbone who could dissect any industry and identify opportunities that others missed. David was the smooth-talking frontman who could walk into any boardroom and make executives believe we were exactly what their company needed. Every late night I spent perfecting proposals felt like an investment in our shared future. While David attended industry mixers and client dinners, I remained in our office crafting the detailed strategies that would make those relationships profitable. I never resented the difference in our roles because I believed we were building something together. When David returned from networking events with potential client leads, I transformed those connections into comprehensive consulting packages. The countless hours felt worthwhile because David always acknowledged my contributions in private. He would come home from successful client meetings and thank me for the brilliant strategies that had impressed the executives. He would celebrate contract signings by crediting my research and analysis for closing the deals. He understood that his charisma was only effective because it was backed by my substance. At least, that was what I had convinced myself was happening. Looking back now, I could see the subtle shifts that had occurred over the past 2 years. David had started taking longer lunches with potential clients, claiming these informal meetings were more effective than our traditional presentation approach. He began attending conferences alone, saying it was more cost-effective for the company. He started referring to certain strategies as his innovations during client calls. Even though I had developed every framework we used, the changes had been gradual enough that I dismissed them as natural evolution of our business dynamic. When he started taking credit for methodologies I had created, I assumed he was simply presenting a unified front to clients who preferred dealing with a single point of contact. I had rationalized every red flag because the alternative was too devastating to consider. David was my husband and my business partner. Our success was intertwined in every possible way. Questioning one meant questioning everything. The recording device in my hand represented the collapse of both foundations simultaneously. David wasn't just planning to betray me personally. He was systematically working to erase my professional contributions and steal the company I had helped build from nothing. The business I had poured my expertise into for 8 years was being repositioned as his sole creation. My mind raced through recent conversations with new clarity. David's casual questions about my client files weren't support of interest. He was gathering information to use against me. His suggestions that I focus more on internal operations while he handled external relationships weren't strategic planning. He was isolating me from the clients who knew my value. The Hartwell Industries presentation had been my project from the beginning. I had identified them as a potential client, researched their market challenges, and developed the customized solutions we were proposing. David had positioned this meeting as our biggest opportunity, but now I understood his real motivation. This was meant to be my documented failure, the evidence he needed to justify pushing me out of the company I had helped create. But something else had been bothering me about David's recent behavior. Something beyond just the business manipulation. The late nights at the office had become more frequent, and there were always explanations that sounded reasonable on the surface. Marcus Rivera had started working as David's assistant 8 months ago, and from the beginning, something about their dynamic felt off. The 26-year-old had an MBA from a decent program, which seemed like overkill for scheduling meetings and managing correspondence. But David insisted we needed someone with strategic thinking abilities to support our growing client base. What struck me as unusual was how quickly Marcus integrated into David's daily routine. Most assistants maintain professional boundaries, but Marcus seemed to be included in every aspect of David's work life. They had private meetings that lasted for hours, often with the office door closed and their voices lowered to whispers. When I walked past David's office, their conversations would stop abruptly, and they would look up with expressions that suggested I had interrupted something important. I noticed the shared looks during company meetings. Marcus would catch David's eye when I was speaking, and they would exchange glances that seemed to carry private meaning. Sometimes Marcus would suppress what looked like laughter when I presented ideas or discussed client feedback. These moments felt significant, but I convinced myself I was reading too much into normal workplace interactions. The discovery happened 2 weeks before the Hartwell Industries presentation. David had been using his tablet to review client files during breakfast, and he left it on our kitchen counter when Marcus called about an urgent matter requiring immediate attention. David rushed upstairs to find documents on his laptop, leaving the tablet open and unlocked. When I moved it while cleaning up coffee spills, the screen lit up with an active message thread. The contact name read Marcus with a red heart emoji. My stomach dropped as I realized what I was looking at. The most recent message from Marcus read, "She's staying late again tonight, working on those slides. Perfect time for us to finalize the timeline." David had responded, "Tomorrow we start phase 2. After Hartwell, she won't have any credibility left." I scrolled upward through months of conversations that revealed the full scope of their relationship and their plans. The messages were intimate in ways that made my marriage feel like a complete fraud. Marcus would send David photos of himself throughout the day, and David would respond with messages about missing him and counting down hours until they could be alone. They discussed restaurants they wanted to visit together, weekend trips they were planning, and a future where they wouldn't have to hide their relationship. The business conspiracy was woven throughout their personal communications. David had been telling Marcus detailed stories about my work habits, my client presentations, and my strategic approaches. But his descriptions were cruel mockeries rather than professional observations. He called my thoroughness obsessive perfectionism and described my client research as pointless over-preparation. Marcus would respond with laughing emojis and comments about how much better their approach would be. One exchange made my blood run cold. Marcus had written, "Chen called again asking about documentation. Says the other investors are getting impatient." David replied, "Tell him we'll have everything he needs after the Hartwell meeting. Video evidence of her incompetence should satisfy everyone." The name Chen triggered a memory. Marcus Chen, the investor who had been pressuring David about my performance during recent calls. This conspiracy reached beyond my marriage and into our business relationships with people who controlled our funding. The cruelest part was how they mocked my dedication to the Hartwell Industries presentation. David had told Marcus about the long hours I was spending on research, the detailed proposals I was crafting, and my excitement about landing our biggest client. Marcus responded with messages like, "She has no idea this is going to be her farewell performance and can't wait to see her face when she realizes she's been working on her own termination." Their plan involved documenting my supposed incompetence during the Hartwell presentation. David had told Marcus that he expected me to struggle with the complex technical questions, freeze under pressure, or make strategic errors that would embarrass our company. Marcus had suggested recording the meeting to capture evidence of my professional failures. David responded enthusiastically, saying the recording would be perfect proof for investors that I wasn't capable of handling major client relationships. The recording pen suddenly made perfect sense. David and Marcus had planned this setup together, choosing a device that would capture my every mistake, while appearing to be a supportive gesture. Their scheme required documentation of my failure to justify the partnership changes they had already set in motion. I heard David's footsteps on the stairs. Quickly, I placed the tablet exactly where I had found it and pretended to be organizing breakfast dishes. My mind was racing, but my face remained calm. 8 years of marriage to a manipulator had taught me how to hide my emotions when necessary. David appeared in the kitchen, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "Everything okay down here?" he asked, his voice carrying that false warmth I now recognized as performance. "Perfect," I said, leaning back against him with a smile that could have won an award. "Just thinking about tomorrow. I'm so excited about our presentation." He squeezed me tighter, and I felt his body relax against mine. He believed his deception was still intact. Tomorrow would be the day he expected to document my professional destruction, but I had other plans. The presentation that was supposed to end my career would become something entirely different. I woke up at 5:30 that morning, 3 hours before the Hartwell Industries presentation that would determine the future of Richardson and Associates. By sunrise, I'd triple-checked every slide, verified every statistic twice, and confirmed that every recommendation included detailed implementation timelines and measurable success metrics. Hartwell Industries represented everything we had worked toward as a consulting firm. Their annual revenue exceeded $200 million, and they were actively seeking strategic partners to help expand into emerging markets. Landing this contract would establish Richardson and Associates as a major player in our industry. More importantly, it would validate 8 years of building our reputation one client at a time. I had studied Hartwell Industries until I knew their business model better than most of their own employees. Their supply chain inefficiencies were costing them approximately $4 million annually. Their customer retention rate lagged behind industry averages by 12%. Their expansion attempts into Southeast Asian markets had failed twice due to inadequate cultural research and poor local partnership strategies. I had identified solutions for every problem and created detailed roadmaps for implementing changes that would save them millions while positioning them for sustainable growth. My presentation materials filled 2 separate folders on my desktop. The main presentation contained 47 slides covering market analysis, strategic recommendations, implementation timelines, and projected return on investment calculations. The supplementary materials included competitor analysis reports, regional market studies, and case studies from similar companies we had helped transform. I could answer any question the Hartwell executives might ask because I had anticipated every possible concern and prepared comprehensive responses. David appeared in the kitchen at 7:15, which was unusual because he typically slept until 8 on presentation days. His support felt too rehearsed, like he was playing a part. When I asked if he was ready for the presentation, he smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes and said he had never been more prepared for anything in his life. He insisted on making my coffee himself, which never happened during important business days. He brought me the mug with unusual ceremony, setting it down carefully and watching me take the first sip. "Drink up? You'll need the energy," he said, his comment striking me as odd, because I had already consumed 2 cups of coffee while reviewing my notes. The recording equipment setup was elaborate for what David claimed was routine documentation. He positioned his laptop at an angle that captured not just my computer screen, but my entire workspace. He set up his phone as a secondary camera, explaining that multiple angles would help us review our performance later. He tested the audio levels twice and adjusted the lighting to ensure optimal video quality. The setup felt more appropriate for a professional production than an internal business meeting. David's insistence on giving me the silver pen felt performative in hindsight. He presented it with unusual formality, explaining that successful presentations required proper tools and that this particular pen would bring me luck. His comment about needing all the confidence I could get carried an undertone that seemed inappropriate for a supportive gesture. The way he watched my reaction when I accepted the pen suggested he was looking for something specific in my response. As 10:30 approached, David positioned himself directly behind my laptop, where he could observe my every movement during the presentation. He claimed this location would allow him to provide silent support if needed, but his presence felt more like surveillance than assistance. He had his own notebook open and was writing observations before the meeting even began. His attention seemed focused on documenting my behavior rather than preparing for his own participation in the presentation. The Hartwell Industries executives joined the video call precisely at 10:30, and I began my opening remarks while David watched from his strategic position. His laptop continued recording from multiple angles, capturing every gesture and facial expression. The elaborate documentation setup for what should have been a routine business presentation felt increasingly inappropriate as the meeting progressed. The morning's unusual preparations took on sinister meaning once I discovered the recording device built into the pen. David's nervous energy wasn't excitement about our potential success. His careful positioning and multiple camera angles weren't supportive documentation of our achievement. His comments about confidence and energy weren't encouragement for my performance. Everything had been calculated to capture evidence of my supposed incompetence. The cruel irony was that David had orchestrated perfect conditions to document his own downfall. His recording devices would capture every moment of what would become the most successful presentation of my career. His elaborate setup would preserve evidence of my expertise and professionalism rather than the failure he anticipated. The pen he gave me to record my mistakes would instead document his complete miscalculation of my abilities. David had spent weeks planning this morning's setup, believing he was creating the perfect trap. Instead, he had handed me the tools to prove my worth while simultaneously exposing his betrayal. The recording devices meant to capture my humiliation would become evidence of his manipulation and my competence. But as I clicked through my opening slides, watching David's expectant face in my peripheral vision, I realized confrontation wasn't my only option. I made a calculation that would change everything. Instead of confronting David immediately, I would let him think his plan was working while I turned his own weapons against him. My fingers found the tiny switch on the recording device while I continued discussing Hartwell's market positioning challenges. Earlier that morning, I had examined the pen carefully after discovering David and Marcus's text messages, studying its design until I understood exactly how the recording mechanism functioned. The switch clicked off with a sound so quiet that David couldn't hear it from his position behind my laptop. His surveillance equipment was now capturing nothing but silence, while he believed he was documenting my failure. The presentation outline David and I had rehearsed called for him to handle the technical implementation sections while I focused on strategic analysis. But as I reached the transition point, I made a spontaneous decision that caught him completely off guard. Instead of introducing David as planned, I smoothly shifted into the implementation discussion myself, explaining that I wanted to provide comprehensive context before bringing in additional perspectives. David's hands trembled slightly over his notes as he realized I wasn't following our agreed script. He had prepared for his traditional role as the charismatic closer, but I was systematically eliminating his opportunities to shine. When I continued speaking about technical specifications and timeline details, his confusion became obvious as he shuffled through papers with increasing urgency. I began weaving my contributions into every aspect of the presentation in ways that made David's role seem supplementary. When discussing market research methodologies, I mentioned that I had personally conducted the competitive analysis over the past 6 months. When explaining our strategic recommendations, I detailed how I had developed the frameworks we used for similar client transformations. Each reference to my work was casual and natural, but the cumulative effect was building a clear picture of who actually understood Hartwell's business. The first pivotal moment came when the Hartwell Industries CEO interrupted my explanation of supply chain optimization to ask a detailed question about implementation costs in their Southeast Asian operations. This was exactly the kind of technical inquiry that David typically deflected with general responses and promises to follow up with specifics. Instead of allowing that dynamic to play out, I provided precise cost breakdowns for each regional market, including currency fluctuation considerations and local regulatory compliance expenses. David shifted uncomfortably as the executives became increasingly engaged with my detailed responses. He had clearly expected to field the complex questions that would demonstrate his expertise, but I was answering everything with specificity that made his input unnecessary. When he attempted to interject with supplementary comments, I acknowledged his contributions politely while continuing to provide the substantial information the clients actually wanted. The second pivotal moment arrived when the Hartwell team asked about our previous experience with companies facing similar market expansion challenges. I began asking David direct questions about specific client cases, knowing that his surface-level knowledge would become obvious under scrutiny. When he provided vague responses about successful outcomes, I followed up with requests for detailed metrics and implementation timelines that he couldn't supply. The recording setup David had arranged to capture my incompetence was now documenting his inability to discuss the actual work we had performed for clients. His laptop continued filming as he fumbled through answers about strategic methodologies he couldn't explain and client results he had never measured. Every hesitation and deflection was being preserved on the video he had intended to use against me. I seized the opportunity to establish myself as their primary point of contact by offering to provide additional research materials that addressed their specific concerns. I mentioned detailed case studies I had prepared that weren't part of our standard presentation, but would directly relate to their expansion goals. David had no knowledge of these supplementary materials because I had developed them independently during my late-night preparation sessions. The power dynamic in the meeting was shifting visibly as the Hartwell team realized which of us possessed genuine expertise versus superficial charm. When they requested follow-up information about regulatory compliance in their target markets, I provided my direct contact information and offered to schedule additional consultation sessions to address their detailed questions. David watched helplessly as I positioned myself as their go-to resource for the technical knowledge they needed. His growing panic became obvious as he realized that his carefully orchestrated plan was producing the opposite of his intended results. The recording devices meant to capture my failure were instead documenting his irrelevance to the actual consulting work. The presentation designed to expose my incompetence was highlighting his lack of substance. As we moved deeper into the technical discussion, David made desperate attempts to regain control by suggesting follow-up meetings where he could provide additional strategic insights. But the Hartwell executives were already focused on the detailed implementation plans I was offering to develop specifically for their needs. The hunter had become the hunted, and David's own weapons were now aimed directly at him. The Hartwell Industries executives were asking increasingly technical questions about market penetration strategies in Southeast Asian markets, and I could see recognition dawning in their eyes. They were realizing that I wasn't just presenting research someone else had conducted. I was the person who had actually done the work. The pivotal moment came when Chief Financial Officer James Chen asked about supply chain optimization techniques for companies with their revenue profile. This was exactly the kind of deep technical question that would expose the difference between surface-level knowledge and genuine expertise. David attempted to respond with generic observations about efficiency improvements and cost reduction strategies, but his answer lasted maybe 30 seconds before trailing off into vague business school terminology. I followed his empty contribution with detailed analysis that I had spent months developing specifically for companies in Hartwell's market position. I produced research materials that weren't part of our standard presentation package, including proprietary analysis of supply chain bottlenecks that were costing companies like theirs approximately $4 million annually. I explained exactly how we had helped a manufacturing company reduce their Southeast Asian operational costs by 18% within 8 months, providing specific methodologies and measurable outcomes that David had never heard about. Chen leaned forward and took notes as I described implementation timelines, cost projections, and accountability measures. When he requested copies of the additional research, I offered to provide customized versions, adapted specifically for Hartwell's operational structure. David watched helplessly as I positioned myself as their primary resource for specialized knowledge they couldn't obtain elsewhere. The contrast was becoming impossible to ignore. David spoke in broad concepts that sounded impressive, but provided no actionable information. When I discussed specific solutions with detailed breakdowns, the Hartwell executives engaged with someone who understood their actual business challenges. His recorded presentation was capturing every moment of his irrelevance to the actual consulting work. CEO Rebecca Martinez turned her attention directly to me when the conversation shifted to project management approaches and implementation timelines. I provided detailed breakdowns of our phased approach, including specific milestones, accountability measures, and adjustment protocols for unexpected challenges. My explanation included references to project management software, progress tracking methodologies, and client communication schedules that ensured transparent collaboration throughout the consulting process. David attempted to regain some authority by suggesting that implementation details could be finalized during follow-up discussions where he could provide strategic oversight. But Martinez was already focused on the concrete plans I was offering. She wanted to know about deliverables, timelines, and measurement criteria, not abstract promises about strategic guidance. The conversation shifted to pricing and contract structure, areas where David typically handled negotiations. But Martinez directed her questions to me, asking about cost structures for the specialized research I had described. She wanted to understand how the additional analysis services would be priced and whether I could commit to specific delivery timelines. I provided the detailed breakdowns that demonstrated my understanding of both the work involved and the value it would provide. Chen asked for my direct contact information so they could schedule follow-up discussions about customizing our approach for their specific expansion timeline. I provided my email and phone number while explaining my availability for additional consultation sessions. David's scheme to document my failure had instead created video evidence of the Hartwell executives requesting to work directly with me, rather than through our company's standard channels. Martinez expressed enthusiasm about moving forward with a consulting partnership based on the comprehensive analysis I had presented. She mentioned that Hartwell's board would be impressed with the depth of preparation and the specific solutions I had proposed for their market expansion challenges. David's plan to record my professional humiliation had produced documentation of the most successful client presentation of my career. As the meeting concluded, I had secured direct communication channels with decision-makers at Hartwell Industries, while David remained a peripheral figure in conversations about his own company's biggest potential contract. His recording equipment had preserved every moment of his professional irrelevance and my established expertise. The Hartwell executives thanked me personally for the thorough presentation and confirmed they would be in touch within 48 hours to discuss contract terms. Martinez specifically mentioned that the level of detailed analysis was exactly what they had hoped to see from a consulting partner. Chen added that my willingness to provide customized research materials demonstrated the kind of commitment they needed for their expansion project. David managed weak smiles and generic closing remarks, but the damage was complete. His carefully orchestrated plan had backfired in ways he couldn't have imagined. The recording devices meant to capture my incompetence had instead documented his complete irrelevance to the work that actually mattered. As I closed my laptop and began organizing my presentation materials, I realized this was only the beginning. David had handed me more than just evidence of my professional competence. He had given me the tools to expose everything he had been planning behind my back. The moment the Hartwell Industries call ended, I knew I had work to do. David was celebrating what he thought had been a successful presentation, completely unaware that his recording device had captured something entirely different than what he intended. While he stepped outside to take what he claimed was an urgent follow-up call from another client, I carefully examined the silver pen that had started this whole revelation. I connected the device to my laptop using a cable I found in David's desk drawer. The files transferred quickly, revealing not just our Hartwell presentation, but weeks of previous recordings. David had been documenting my work sessions, client calls, and strategy meetings without my knowledge. Every late night I spent perfecting proposals had been captured on video. Every phone conversation I had with potential clients had been recorded. He had been building a surveillance archive of my professional activities for months. The recordings painted a clear picture of who actually performed the work at Richardson and Associates. Video after video showed me conducting detailed client research, developing strategic frameworks, and crafting the proposals that David presented as collaborative efforts. The timestamps proved that I had been working during hours when David claimed to be handling business development. The recordings showed me alone in our office at midnight, perfecting presentations that David would deliver the next day to clients who believed he had created the content. My phone had been recording audio during today's presentation through an app I had activated before the meeting began. David had no idea that his own surveillance tactics were being turned against him. The audio captured every moment of his professional inadequacy during the Hartwell call. His inability to answer technical questions was preserved alongside my detailed responses. His desperate attempts to regain control were documented next to my confident handling of complex client concerns. David's computer contained additional proof of his deception that went far beyond the affair with Marcus. Email threads with potential investors revealed his systematic misrepresentation of my role in our company's success. He had been describing me as administrative support who handled paperwork while he developed strategic initiatives. Messages to business contacts portrayed him as the innovative mind behind our consulting methodologies. Client testimonials had been edited to remove references to my specific contributions to their project outcomes. Financial records on his laptop showed irregularities that explained how he had been funding his elaborate deception. Company funds had been used for personal expenses, including expensive dinners with Marcus, weekend trips disguised as business conferences, and technology purchases that had nothing to do with our consulting work. David had been treating Richardson and Associates as his personal checking account, while I focused on actually serving our clients. The misappropriated funds totaled tens of thousands of dollars over the past 8 months. Legal documents hidden in password-protected folders revealed the full scope of David's plan to force me out of the business. He had been consulting with attorneys about dissolving our partnership and restructuring the company as his sole proprietorship. The paperwork included valuations of our client relationships that credited him with developing every major account. Intellectual property assessments attributed our consulting methodologies entirely to his innovation. Text message backups from David's phone contained months of conversations with Marcus about their timeline for removing me from Richardson and Associates. They had planned to wait until after the Hartwell contract was secured to avoid disrupting our biggest revenue opportunity. Marcus had been researching legal precedents for forced partnership dissolutions based on performance concerns. David had been documenting supposed examples of my professional incompetence to support their case for my removal. The evidence also revealed David's false claims to our existing clients about his role in their project successes. He had been taking credit for strategic innovations I had developed, presenting them as his original thinking during networking events and industry conferences. Client testimonials quoted him discussing methodologies he had never actually understood. Conference presentations listed him as the primary author of case studies I had written entirely by myself. I methodically preserved every piece of evidence, copying files to secure cloud storage and creating detailed documentation of their content. Screenshots of financial irregularities were saved with timestamps. Audio recordings were backed up with summaries of their significance. Email threads were exported with complete metadata. My approach was systematic and professional, building an archive that would be impossible for David to delete or alter. My consultation with attorney Rebecca Hayes was scheduled for the following morning. I prepared comprehensive summaries of each type of evidence, along with supporting documentation that proved my contributions to Richardson and Associates. The case file I assembled would establish my rightful ownership of the company David was trying to steal. The irony was perfect in its cruelty. David's own recording device had provided the evidence that would destroy his scheme. His meticulous documentation of my work had created proof of my indispensable value to our business. His surveillance of my professional activities had captured video testimony of my expertise and dedication. I decided to let David continue with his plan while I prepared my response. He had no idea that his recording device had been discovered or that his evidence archive had been copied. His confidence in his scheme would make his downfall more complete when the truth emerged. Now I just had to wait for the right moment to spring my own trap. David returned from his call with the satisfied expression of someone who believed his plan was proceeding perfectly. He had no idea that his recording device had captured something entirely different than what he intended. "David, we need to talk about the business," I said, closing my laptop and turning to face him directly. The silver pen sat on the desk between us, and I could see his eyes flick toward it with satisfaction. His confidence faltered when I pulled out printed copies of his text messages with Marcus. The intimate conversations, the business conspiracy, the months of planning my removal from Richardson and Associates. His face went through confusion, recognition, and then desperate calculation as he tried to figure out how much I actually knew. "Sarah, those messages are taken out of context," he started. "Which part was out of context?" I asked, reading directly from the printouts. When Marcus wrote, "She has no idea this is going to be her farewell performance," or when you replied, "Can't wait to see her face when she realizes she's been working on her own termination." David's mouth opened and closed without sound. I placed the financial records on the desk next to the messages. Bank statements showing his misuse of company funds. Credit card receipts for romantic dinners with Marcus charged to our business account. $40,000, David, stolen from the company I helped build. Those were legitimate business expenses that I just hadn't documented properly, he said, but his voice carried no conviction. Business expenses? I opened my laptop and clicked play on the presentation recording. "Let's see how much business expertise you demonstrated today." The video showed David fumbling through non-answers when the Hartwell executives asked about implementation costs. His confusion was obvious as clients requested specifics he couldn't provide. I fast-forwarded to the moment when I seamlessly took control of the technical discussion. "You told them you were the innovative mind behind our consulting frameworks," I said. "This recording suggests otherwise." His shock was complete when I explained how I had discovered and disabled his recording device during the presentation. The silver pen that was supposed to capture my failure had instead documented his professional inadequacy. A knock at the door interrupted our confrontation. Marcus appeared in the doorway, arriving for what he thought was a celebration of my downfall. His face went white when he saw the evidence spread across my desk. "We can explain everything," Marcus said, but he was looking at months of documented betrayal laid out in organized piles. David made one final attempt to salvage his scheme. "Sarah, this has all been a misunderstanding. The messages were just private venting, not actual business planning." His explanation collapsed when I played the recorded audio from our morning preparation. His comment about needing all the confidence I could get took on sinister meaning when played alongside the text messages about documenting my expected failure. Perfect timing delivered the final blow. A courier knocked and handed me an envelope from Hartwell Industries. The contract was addressed specifically to me, not to Richardson and Associates or to both partners. Rebecca Martinez had included a personal note requesting my direct involvement in their project implementation and expressing enthusiasm about working with someone who understood their business challenges so thoroughly. I held up the signed contract. "They want to work with me directly, David, not us, me." David stared at the envelope as the full scope of his defeat became clear. His elaborate plan to steal my business had instead provided me with comprehensive evidence of his conspiracy. His recording devices had documented his own professional inadequacy. His surveillance had captured proof of my indispensable value to our clients. Marcus backed toward the door, realizing their carefully planned conspiracy had been completely exposed. David's shoulders sagged as he processed what had happened. His own weapons had become the instruments of his destruction. The recording pen meant to capture my failure had preserved evidence of my expertise. The surveillance setup designed to document my incompetence had instead shown the Hartwell executives exactly who possessed the knowledge they needed. "You have two choices," I said, my voice steady and professional. "Leave Richardson and Associates voluntarily with a buyout based on your actual contributions, or I expose your financial theft and business fraud publicly." David looked at the evidence surrounding him. The text messages revealing his conspiracy with Marcus, the financial records proving his theft of company funds, the recording that captured his professional inadequacy during our most important client presentation, the signed contract that established my direct relationship with our biggest client. His final desperate threat about exposing details of our personal relationship fell flat. I had already consulted with attorneys about protecting myself from exactly this type of retaliation. The man who had tried to steal everything I had built was left with nothing but the consequences of his own betrayal. 3 months later, Richardson and Associates belonged entirely to me. The Hartwell Industries contract had led to 5 additional major clients who specifically requested my strategic expertise. David's recording device sits in my desk drawer as a reminder of how completely his plan had backfired. The pen meant to capture my professional failure had instead preserved video evidence of my competence and his betrayal. David lost his business partnership, his credibility in our industry, and his marriage in a single devastating week. His own weapon had destroyed him completely. The experience taught me that sometimes the people closest to us reveal their true intentions when they think we're not watching. Trust, once broken by calculated betrayal, becomes a gift we give more carefully. What would you do if you discovered someone you trusted was systematically working to destroy everything you'd built? Share your thoughts in the comments below.